We hope you enjoy today's story. I am a rural boy. My name is Bill Carlson. I have a specialist diploma in animal husbandry. After completing my education, I aspired to establish a farm supply store and raise a family. I married my high school sweetheart, Jenny. We grew up together and she was the only girl I ever imagined myself living with. She was a pretty brunette and had a beautiful body even after giving birth to 2 boys. I was proud that she was my wife. My wife and I were willing to do anything for her. However, Jenny had one problem: she envied people who led glamorous lives. She read society columns in newspapers and subscribed to magazines that discussed beautiful people. When she went to the dentist, she read car magazines and was familiar with fashionable cars. She was also familiar with designers and their clothing lines. She wanted to be someone more in the world, and I couldn't provide that for her. Consequently, I got a job in Omaha at a trendy farm. The supply store catered to toy-uppies, which allowed us to be closer to the big city while still pursuing my preferred business. I enjoyed my job and was adept at it. I was able to relate to customers on a personal level, and the company rewarded my efforts with a flexible schedule. Jenny preferred living in the city rather than out in the country, and for a while, she was content when she decided to go to work. We had to enroll the children in daycare, but they appeared to adjust well to it. Jenny worked at a company that manufactured. She was employed by a medical equipment company called Gilbert Medical, which produced syringes and other medical supplies. The position was office-based, and she appeared content, as it enabled her to dress in a professional manner and interact with individuals outside of her agricultural background. However, her workload was considerable, and this resulted in a loss of interest in our family life. Consequently, I assumed primary responsibility for the boys' care, including transporting them to and from daycare, attending to their nutritional needs, and assisting with domestic tasks such as cooking and cleaning. She ensured that all her clothes were perfectly pressed, and we saved money each month to eventually open my own farm supply store. However, despite her employment, we were unable to save any money. Her daily expenses were not significant, but a considerable portion was allocated to beauty salons, manicure parlors, and expensive clothing stores. It was challenging for me to comprehend how we could have 2 jobs and save less money. She was reluctant to discuss the matter and became defensive and upset whenever I raised the topic. For a period of time, I ceased mentioning the issue. However, I subsequently opened another savings account that I could manage separately. My wife began working overtime, she began receiving calls late at night, she became less attentive in bed, she expressed a desire for a newer, better car, and she even discussed the possibility of getting breast implants. I had no doubt that my wife was having an affair. Perhaps I am simply a simple country boy, but I am not naive at that point. I did not even want to salvage the marriage, I simply wanted to sort things out and move on before it was too late. It was challenging to discern the precise nature of the situation, as I did not interact with the individuals with whom my wife was employed. However, I was strongly inclined to believe that if an affair were occurring, it would be with someone from her workplace. I worked alongside a few exemplary individuals. They were not particularly well educated, but they were dedicated and hardworking. I held a supervisory role over them, but I never assumed a dominant or authoritative position. The work was completed efficiently and effectively without the need for excessive supervision. Everyone was aware of their responsibilities, and we collaborated effectively. The team members expressed appreciation for this approach, which fostered positive relations. It was anticipated that Roy and Freddie would prove invaluable allies in the implementation of the plan. It was observed that in the presence of Jenny, they consistently donned fashionable lingerie and their most refined attire. It appeared that she required additional time to prepare for work. It was determined that the moment had arrived to take action. The plan was conveyed to the team, who concurred to assume responsibility for the day's deliveries and appointments. The vehicle was situated in close proximity to the parking lot of Gilbert Medical, a strategic location that afforded an optimal vantage point to observe the technical aspects at approximately 11 o'clock. At 11 o'clock, Jenny emerged and entered her vehicle. It was relatively simple to follow her, and after a few minutes, she parked in the west end of the hotel parking lot, a considerable distance from the office. A few minutes later, a man in a red Corvette arrived and parked in the east end. I did not recognize the vehicle, but when he exited, Jenny exited her vehicle as well. They proceeded to a room on the second floor, room 117, and then entered. The man already had the key, which caused me to experience a sense of unease and slight apprehension. A sensation of nausea arose in my stomach. My suspicions were confirmed. I was unsure of how to proceed. I opted to leave and return to work. I did not hasten to devise a plan of action before exiting the parking lot. I exited the vehicle and made contact with 2 wires of her valve with my wire cutters, one from the front and one from the back. I experienced a degree of shock. I am uncertain as to why I did not inflict further punctures upon him. The remainder of the day passed at a slow pace. I proceeded to, after work, she drove home and prepared dinner. When she arrived, I inquired about her day. She stated that it had been uneventful, apart from experiencing a flat tire. One of her colleagues at the workplace had assisted her in changing it. There was no further discussion about the incident. The following day, after dropping off her children at childcare, she proceeded to the factory. She was able to locate the vehicle in question, a high-end Corvette, with minimal effort. Fortunately, the individual in question had reserved a parking spot with a sign. I made a note of the fact that Ken Bos distribution manager Roy's wife was employed in the Human Resources Department at Gilbert Medical. By that evening, I was aware of all the relevant details about Ken. The most significant information I had was that he was already married. He had been given a warning for making sexual propositions to one of his colleagues and he was experiencing financial difficulties with his accounts. I obtained his address, phone number, cell phone number, and even his social security number, but I was unsure of how to proceed with this information. He had been married for 8 years and his wife's name was Amy. We collaborated effectively in Roy, Freddie, and I found time to have a beer each before I had to collect the children. I was still uncertain about my next steps but confident that a solution would present itself. I attempted to remain calm and logical in this situation, but I was becoming increasingly distressed. At times, I caught myself silently crying. The situation was painful and I felt like I was unable to resolve it. Living with Jenny the situation was becoming increasingly challenging. I was eager for a resolution. Fortunately, I recalled that Marge Gilbert, one of my most esteemed clients, was the wife of the president of Gilbert Medical, a prominent medical company. Despite not having met the president, I had a positive rapport with Marge. I was particularly interested in exploring whether our relationship could be leveraged to my advantage. However, this opportunity was soon eclipsed by the arrival of Marge's daughter, Cindy, who was in her final year of veterinary school. Marge had commenced her studies at veterinary school, and Cindy and I conversed for approximately an hour. I derived pleasure from our interaction, and after I departed, I experienced a fleeting sense of culpability. However, this sentiment swiftly dissipated during the weekend. I engaged in welding activities within the garage, utilizing a piece of flat steel to which I had affixed 4 sharp tips. I crafted these tips from dowels to guarantee their durability and stability. The plate, measuring approximately 15 by 15 centimeters, was intended to serve as the initial step in retaliating against the harassment I had endured commenced on Tuesday. I was somewhat preoccupied while processing the order and was not in my optimal state of mind. This was noticed by Bill, who inquired about my demeanor. I informed him that I was experiencing personal issues. "Marge, I am sorry that I am not in a good mood today. Let us have coffee, and you can tell me about it." We proceeded into the house and sat in the kitchen, which resembled the interior of a restaurant. Everything was made of the interior of the house was characterized by the presence of rusting steel and granite, which gave it the appearance of a magazine. I considered that Jenny would appreciate it. Marge placed the coffee on the table, leaned forward, and inquired as to whether I could assist her. Marge stated that she was unsure of how she could help me until I explained the problem. I was reluctant to discuss the matter with her, but eventually decided that it might be beneficial to my wife. Janice works at Gilbert Medical, and I believe she is being coerced into having sex with one of her superiors. However, I am unable to provide concrete evidence. Could you please provide your opinion as to why you believe this is occurring? The incidents have been largely inconsequential, but last week I witnessed. Both individuals were observed to be in the same hotel room. My wife is unaware of this information, and I am uncertain as to the most appropriate manner in which to broach the subject. I am unsure as to whether this is something that she feels obliged to do or if it is something that she desires to do. Our family life has reached a point where she appears to be indifferent to the needs of our children and me. It appears that she is concealing this information, which is a significant cause for concern. I am uncertain as to the identity of this individual, who I believe may be named Ken Bos. It is unclear to me whether Janice is employed by him or if they occupy different roles within the same manufacturing facility. I have never had the opportunity to interact with him directly. Would you like me to attempt to facilitate a resolution? I took a moment to consider the situation. I lowered my head in contemplation. If you believe that a solution can be achieved without undue fuss, would be willing to attempt it. However, I am reluctant to make an issue of it. Let me take the lead on this. We will convene next Thursday for the oatmeal delivery. I thanked her and, as I rose to take my leave, I inquired as to Cindy's whereabouts. I was informed that she had returned to school. I will be at home this weekend. Would you kindly bring the boys over so that she can meet them? It turned out much better than I had anticipated. I am confident that Janice will not have an issue with me taking the boys for a walk. These could be beneficial weekends. The following morning, it was raining heavily. Janice was dressed up once more. For her special day, I remained silent, observing as I dropped the children off at the daycare and subsequently proceeded to work. The team was prepared to provide coverage for me during the morning shift. Roy was designated to utilize my vehicle for deliveries and to document them in the journal. I was responsible for initializing all the entries. Upon my return to work, Freddie arrived with his cousin's van. I proceeded to load the jack into the vehicle. We then attached my steel plate to the jack's lift. After loading the trucks, I departed for the hotel. I arrived at the hotel just in time, as Janice and Ken were already there. Janice parked in the same spot as before, while Ken lagged behind for a few moments and also parked in the same spot as before. I then allowed approximately 10 minutes for them to settle in the room. I proceeded to remove the jack from the rear of the van, which was raining heavily, and transport it to Ken's vehicle. I then slid the jack beneath the engine block and lifted it. It was only a few seconds before I heard a loud thud as the nails punctured the oil pan. I then threw the jack to the ground and climbed into the back seat of the Corvette. A few seconds later, I heard the same thuds. The fuel tank, oil, and gasoline were leaking. I returned the jack to the van, and this process was completed in less than a minute. I proceeded to Janice's car and, once again, cut 2 valves with my bolt cutters. By that point, I was prepared to depart. I drove past Ken's car, flicked a lit cigarette out the window, and subsequently departed, observing the flames and hearing an explosion as I pulled out. Upon exiting the parking lot, I experienced a sense of relief. Janice returned from her place of employment at a later hour than usual. She did not consume dinner and instead retired directly to bed. I engaged in play with the boys for a period of time, bathed them, and put them to bed that night. I slept on the couch. Janice remained in bed the following morning. As I prepared the boys for their day at daycare, we shared breakfast and subsequently departed. She did not rise from bed and did not communicate any indication of her whereabouts. Her vehicle was not present in the driveway by approximately 9 a.m. The time was 12 a.m. After we loaded all the trucks, I was visited by Police Lieutenant John Fritz. He was a rather affable individual. He inquired about my work schedule the previous day, noting that it was relatively typical, with no noteworthy exceptions. I then asked him to account for his whereabouts around noon. In response, he proceeded to enter the office and retrieve the delivery logs. From the previous day's records, I provided him with the delivery logs, which included the location, delivered goods, unloading time, and my initials. He acknowledged the presentation with a smile and a slight chuckle. He expressed appreciation for the comprehensive log and inquired about the frequency of its use. I informed him that this was a daily occurrence and suggested that he might find it beneficial to review the logs from the previous month. He declined, maintaining a neutral expression. Surely, you must be aware of the implications of this situation. Would you be willing to provide me with further details? I inquired. It appeared that he was reluctant to divulge the specifics, but eventually, he did so. Yesterday, a vehicle was damaged at the hotel in East Omaha, and we are attempting to ascertain whether anyone was aware of the incident. What is the relevance of this information to me? Well, the other vehicle parked adjacent to the damaged vehicle had 2 aluminum stems cut. It belonged to your wife. We were curious as to whether this was a coincidence or not. First of all, I am unsure why my wife's vehicle was at the hotel parking lot. Secondly, I am uncertain as to the relevance of this information in relation to the damaged vehicle. The damaged vehicle belonged to an employee she worked with, it transpired. The incident occurred during a lunch meeting with the company's clients at the hotel. It is unclear whether the individuals involved spoke with the clients or attempted to recall their names. It is essential to maintain transparency and avoid evasive tactics. The individual in question leaned back in his chair and smiled. A gentleman named Ken Bosom, whom I have never had the opportunity to meet, appeared to be a reliable source of information. I am inclined to believe his account of the situation. I am not inclined to become involved in family disputes and hope that I will not have to return to this matter. I am providing you with my contact information in case you require further assistance. He shook my hand. I apologize for having to bring this to your attention. Should I be of any assistance, please do not hesitate to contact me. As he took his leave, I expressed my gratitude, noting that he had not yet provided me with any concrete information. After work, when I returned home with my children, Janice's vehicle was parked in the driveway. She was attired in a casual manner and had prepared dinner. She informed me that she was not feeling well and had retired early to bed. She had not yet disclosed the events of the previous day, so I did not inquire about them. She retired to bed early, and I assumed responsibility for the children once more, spending the night on the couch. The following day, she was up and preparing for her workday when I departed with the boy for daycare. After dropping them off, I proceeded to the doctor's office and requested a minor ailment be treated. Upon returning home from work on Friday, I found Janice to be present once again after dinner. I informed her of my intention to take the boys to spend the following day at one of my client farms. I anticipated that she would decline the invitation, as she often did, and that she would cite a need to do some shopping. However, she surprised me by saying that she needed to go shopping as well. It was irrelevant whether the excursion was intended as a shopping trip or a date, the outcome would be the same. On Saturday, I accompanied Cindy and the boys to Gilbert's ranch, where the day was a resounding success. We thoroughly enjoyed ourselves throughout the day. Marge had prepared an excellent lunch for everyone, and I was reluctant for the day to end. Cindy was extremely fond of the boys, and it seemed that they also took to her. Gilbert was not present, so I never had the opportunity to meet him. Marge did not mention anything about our previous conversation, and Cindy seemed unaware of it. I was reluctant to return home, but eventually we had to do so. Janice did not inquire about the details of our day. She appeared to be uninterested in the matter. The boys attempted to inform her about their activities on several occasions, but she did not seem to care. However, she ignored them. Eventually, they ceased attempting to elicit a response. She inquired as to why I no longer slept in the bed. I explained that due to work-related issues, I experienced significant restlessness and was reluctant to disrupt her sleep. That was the last mention of the matter. The following week proceeded without incident on her special day. I observed that she did not make any preparations. Given the special preparations, I assumed our date for that day was cancelled, which suited me fine because I had a lot of work to catch up on. I stopped by the divorce lawyer's office, which I had heard about, and she provided me with some handouts and brochures containing a great deal of information. She also had a few completed forms that appeared intriguing, and everything was returned. By the following Wednesday, she had resumed her normal routine, beginning with a morning shower and carefully styling her hair. She wore new black lingerie and perfume, and even appeared to have new shoes. I was careful not to let her catch me looking, and I left with the boys. I was sure it was a date day, so I went to the plant and checked his parking spot. A new Porsche Boxer was parked in his spot. I noted the car's license plate number and hurried back to work. I observed the vehicle in question, noting the license plate number. I then returned to my duties at the office. My colleagues and I proceeded to complete the morning's deliveries and resume work on the journals. I believe John Fritz was aware of our actions. Nevertheless, we proceeded with the endeavor. Roy continued with the deliveries, while Freddie procured 2 large bottles of hydrochloric acid from the pool supply store. I then sought to have lunch with John Fritz. His demeanor was peculiar when I entered his office with sandwiches, pork fries, and 2 bottles of Coca-Cola. I greeted him and sat across from him. He realized something was amiss and displayed a broad grin. I informed him that I believed we could have lunch together, and he could provide further details regarding the incident involving the damaged vehicle. I required a means of engaging him for an hour or 2. The lunch proved to be a lengthy affair, as I was striving to maintain a polite demeanor. Freddie was situated in the hotel parking lot. He located the Porsche Boxer and proceeded to douse the trunk fenders and hood with acid, then cut open the convertible top and poured acid on the leather seats and floor mats. He then added a dose of acid to the dashboard. He placed a box of mothballs in the gas tank, as gasoline would not react well with the engine if someone were to start it. He then spilled the remaining acid onto the top part of the tires before leaving. He cut the valve stems on Janice's car were also subjected to the same treatment. The entire process was completed within 15 minutes. The only disadvantage was the lack of knowledge regarding the duration of their effect. John and I engaged in lengthy discussions about inconsequential matters until he eventually inquired about the specifics of my activities. He wanted to ensure that I had a solid alibi in case something untoward occurred with Ken Basham's vehicle. What, precisely, makes today so exceptional? The pulled pork sandwich was a notable culinary experience. I proceeded to contact the daycare facility via cellular telephone. I informed the operator that I would be otherwise engaged at work that afternoon and requested that she kindly inquire with Janice about the possibility of her picking up her sons. I expressed my gratitude and explained that I would appreciate it if she could call as soon as possible. I am grateful for your assistance. John leaned back in his chair and emitted a brief, mirthful sound. The pork sandwiches were quite palatable. For a period of time, the group was silent. John then inquired, should I contact Mr. Bosom to inquire about his vehicle? What is your motivation for doing so? Do you know where I could reach him? I provided him with Mr. Bosom's cellular number, which was listed in room 117 at the hotel. John then activated the speakerphone. After a few rings, Ken Bosom answered the phone. He was breathing heavily. Hello, Mr. Bosom. This is Detective Fritz. I'm calling to inform you that we still have no leads on who damaged your car. Why are you calling here? How did you get this number? I'm a police officer. Mr. Bosom, have you already purchased a new car? Yes, I have. Why do you ask? I just wanted to make sure Is the vehicle currently in your possession? Yes, it is in the parking lot. Is everything in order? I will ascertain. In the background, Ken could be heard uttering exclamations of distress as he surveyed the parking lot through the window. He then returned to the phone, stating, there is something amiss. I must don my attire and proceed to investigate. He then said, I shall call you back at the earliest opportunity. All right, Mr. Bosom. Why aren't you dressed right now? That is none of your business. I need to go. They both hung up. John looked at me and smiled. He seemed happy. Listen, I need to get back to work. If you have any questions, give me a call. Furthermore, Freddie concealed the acid bottles in a location that would not be discovered until the following day. The situation at home was also noteworthy. Janice collected the boys but did not divulge any information and retired for the evening. The following day, John visited me to discuss the damage to his vehicle. He also informed me that Ken's insurance company had not compensated him for the damage caused by the Corvette. The car was fully repaired, and he had incurred losses exceeding $60. Ken was adamant that I was complicit in the incident, despite John's assertion that I was with him at the time. John was aware of my involvement but lacked the evidence to substantiate it. I believe he was reluctant to pursue the matter. The method Janice employed to repair the tires remains a mystery to me, as I never inquired about it and no one else volunteered the information. Janice never divulged the full extent of the situation. I thus deemed it necessary to bring the matter to a definitive conclusion. My test results were unremarkable, and I completed the requisite paperwork for the lawyer to initiate divorce proceedings. I plan to visit the Gilbert Ranch this weekend with the boys, contingent on Cindy's availability. If not, we would have spent the day with Marge. The only disadvantage was that I still had no evidence of the extramarital affair. The weekend proceeded without incident, Cindy was present, the children were delighted, and we all enjoyed ourselves immensely. We were once again a unified family unit. I truly missed this, as did the boys. Cindy still I was uncertain as to the circumstances, but at least she did not inquire before my departure. Marge gave me a wink and said everything would be okay. I was offered a new position approximately 150 kilometers away from here. It was for more money, a superior position, and the opportunity to purchase shares in the company in a few years. It was ideal. The sole disadvantage was that we would no longer be in close proximity to Cindy the following Wednesday. Janice had once again dressed in a manner befitting the occasion. I was uncertain as to the vehicle her boyfriend would be utilizing, but it was evident that she was preparing for another visit with him. I surmised that they were still meeting at the same location. I had considered an alternative course of action, but I had not formulated it in advance. While the boys and I were attempting to devise a plan of action, Marge Gilbert arrived. She requested that I accompany her, and she instructed me to enter the vehicle. She did not utter a word, she simply drove to the factory and parked at the rear. We then proceeded to enter through a separate entrance. We proceeded directly to Mr. Gilbert's office, where Marge introduced us. His secretary provided us with coffee. We engaged in conversation about inconsequential matters for a period of time, and I eventually inquired as to the purpose of my visit. Mr. Gilbert responded with a chuckle and stated that it was time to conclude the show. Marge then informed me of the situation. Once everything is ready, we will begin. By the end of the day, you should have all the information you need. If I do anything that puts you in an awkward position, I apologize in advance. It is not my intention to cause you pain. We discussed as time passed. Marge observed that I smiled when the conversation turned to Cindy. I attempted to conceal my feelings, but I was not particularly adept at doing so. The phone rang, and everyone's attention was immediately drawn to it. What is the latest development? Thank you for the call. Have you received all the necessary instructions? Mr. Gilbert responded, right. Gilbert smiled and said, everything is in place. We can begin. Ken and his wife are in their usual hotel room. Ken arrived there in the company's private jet, which is in violation of company policy. They are currently transporting him back to the factory. I regret to inform you that it appears that your wife is also. It would appear that Ken has suffered the misfortune of experiencing a couple of flat tires. This seems to be some kind of tradition. He proceeded to activate the speakerphone and dial the number. Ken, this is Mr. Gilbert. I apologize for disturbing you, but I am in urgent need of discussing a matter of great importance with you. The background conversation was inaudible. Is the female employee present of her own volition, or is she here as a result of any pressure or threats from your side? It is confirmed that the sexual encounter was consensual on both sides. This information is greatly appreciated as it will help to resolve the current situation. The honesty displayed in this delicate matter is much appreciated. A statement will be prepared to confirm this information and everything will be ready now. It would be beneficial to clarify this with the young lady. Please connect her. There was a flurry of background noise that we couldn't make out. Finally, Janice appeared on the line. Sir, how can I be of assistance? Janice, did Mr. Bosom use any coercive or threatening tactics to persuade you to go there with him? No, he did not threaten you in any way. I am reassured to hear that the sexual encounter was consensual and that you were not intimidated. Is that correct? There was a pause, during which a number of muffled conversations took place. Janice then appeared on the line. Yes, sir. The encounter was consensual. It is good to hear this when you and Ken return to the plant. We will have statements prepared for your signature. Could you kindly reconnect Ken? Sir, could you clarify how you knew my name? There is no need to concern yourself with that, Janice. After Ken returned to the phone, Mr. Gilbert instructed him to return to the plant so they could sign the necessary documents in the legal department. He then terminated the call. Marge suggested that I take Bill out for lunch and return in a couple of hours, by which time the lawyers should have finished their work and we could resume our lives. We had a pleasant lunch. I was tempted to shed tears of gratitude, but I restrained myself. Eventually, she convinced me to agree to. We agreed that this topic would never be discussed again, and I also promised not to divulge any details to Cindy. This was a positive indication that the matter was being handled discreetly. I informed Marge about my new job offer, and she expressed her support for me and the boys. After lunch, we returned to the plant, where I retrieved notarized copies of Ken and Janice's statements. Both individuals affirmed that they had engaged in consensual sexual intercourse outside of marriage. The lawyers reassured me that this was sufficient for my attorney to proceed with the divorce proceedings. Ken and Janice were both terminated from their roles, and their personal belongings had been packed before they even arrived. They were subsequently removed from the premises. Neither individual possessed a vehicle. Marge provided her vehicle for the duration of the journey and stipulated that it be returned the following day. The requisite documentation was delivered to the legal representatives, with multiple copies produced for their convenience. One such copy was addressed to Ken's wife. The bank accounts were then closed, the outstanding credit balances settled, and the utility providers contacted to arrange for the termination of services on Friday afternoon. A final visit was made to John Fritz, who was informed of the circumstances, and the landlord was duly notified. I informed my workplace that I would not be staying the following month. They were happy for me, but unhappy about my departure. Freddie drove with me to the Gilberts' ranch in my truck so I could return Mar's car. It was time to pick up the boys and head home. I was afraid to cross the threshold. Upon entering the residence, we discovered that the vehicle was not present in the driveway. The subject was seated on the couch, exhibiting visible signs of distress. This was the first occasion on which she had displayed any outward emotional response. 2 boxes of her personal belongings from the workplace were also present. The boys were provided with nourishment, and the television was activated for their benefit. The subject was positioned in close proximity to me, as though I were offering her an opportunity to speak. If you wish to speak, you should have done so. It is not correct to assume that you had the right to interfere in my life. Why could you not simply refrain from involvement in my affairs? I was taken aback by her continued perception of the situation as revolving around her. She demonstrated a lack of concern for the well-being of her children and me. She did not consider the impact of her actions on our family, our relationship, or our future plans. Her focus was solely on the present moment, and nothing else seemed to matter to her. I felt a sense of relief that I would not have to continue living with her. During the period of my life that I spent with her, I did not offer any commentary. I proceeded to the upper floor of the residence and engaged in a period of personal hygiene. Subsequent to that, when I was preparing the boys for the evening, she entered the bedroom and closed the door. On the following day, I accompanied the boys to my place of employment. I ensured that all matters were concluded and that Roy and Freddie were able to. I advised him to adhere to the system I had established. We proceeded to a number of establishments and procured boxes for relocation. I observed the vehicle belonging to Janice, which was not present at the hotel. I therefore surmised that she had already rectified the puncture. The repair of the flat tires must have represented a significant financial burden for her over the previous month. Janice was not present upon our arrival. Upon arrival, we only took clothes and toys. I left everything else there for Janice to dispose of. Of course, she was unaware that all utilities would be disconnected the following day. I must admit that I was rather crafty in my planning. As we departed from the driveway, Janice was parking her vehicle. She simply stood by her car and observed our departure. I observed the family's departure from the residence via the street. I accompanied the boys to Chuck E. Cheese's, where we remained overnight. The following morning, I escorted the boys to their childcare facility. I provided Carol with baked goods and mementos for the celebration, informing her that it was the boys' final day and that I wished for them to enjoy it with their friends. Prior to my departure, she requested a private conversation. She inquired about the circumstances surrounding my wife's actions the previous week. I was initially reluctant to inquire, but given my imminent departure, I was overcome with curiosity. She was particularly insistent on learning the source of the telephone number I had provided. When I informed her that you had furnished me with the number, she became visibly agitated. She did not respond when I picked up the children, but I could discern her displeasure. "I regret that I placed you in this difficult position, Carol." Janice was engaged in an extramarital affair. She was at a hotel with her partner, and I was hoping that if I persuaded you to call and disrupt their meeting, she would reconsider her actions. However, it did not work. She became angry with both of us. I am now serving her divorce papers, and the children and I are leaving for I commenced a new position shortly after collecting the children. I recognize that this was an unwise decision and offer my apologies for involving you in this matter. I consulted with my divorce lawyer, who had prepared all the necessary documentation. I was responsible for collecting the children, and Janice was granted visitation rights at her convenience. I considered this to be an optimal arrangement, as I believed that she would not be interested in the children. The remainder of the settlement was divided equally, with no further discussion required. There were no alimony payments, child support, or cash settlements. I transferred all the furniture, appliances, and other household items were not necessary for me. She retained her vehicle, but I was not interested in it because its tires were prone to deflation. My sole obligation was to transfer the relevant documents to Janice. If she did not contest the divorce, the proceedings would be concluded within 3 months. A notarized copy of Ken and Janice's statement was attached to the divorce papers. A brief note in the margin, drafted by the lawyer, indicated that the statement would be kept confidential if all the terms of the divorce were agreed upon, and there were no questions. The vehicle was parked in the driveway, indicating that she was home. I sat in the driveway for a considerable length of time. I held a profound affection for Janice. She was the only woman with whom I had ever formed a close bond. I considered our relationship to be typical and was unaware that I was failing to provide her with what she desired. She never explicitly conveyed her needs, and I was too naive to discern the subtle indications. I failed to meet her expectations in numerous ways. Her actions were deceitful, but I experienced a sense of partial responsibility for my inattentiveness. I knocked on the door of my own house, which felt somewhat unusual. She opened the door for me and appeared to be fatigued. She inquired if I desired a beverage, and I handed her the documents. She did not bother to open them. Instead, she merely glanced at them and then back at me. I gazed at her and inquired as to why I was unable to discern whether she was angry or sad. After a few seconds, she finally opened up. "He exuded a scent of aftershave, while you emitted a scent of fertilizer. He wore Armani suits, while she wore jeans. He ate lobsters and steaks, while she ate ribs and burgers. He wore a London fog coat, while she wore a Carhartt. He drove a fancy car, while she drove a truck. His nails were clean, while hers were always dirty. He had a real job, while she was still just a country boy. Is that enough for you? I could go on all day if you want. I had hoped for a life that you couldn't give me. I am sorry. We got married, Bill. I married you for the wrong reasons. I should have known better. I have long been aware that you were unable or unwilling to provide me with what I truly desired. I initially viewed you as a means of distancing myself from my parents but failed to consider the long-term implications of this decision. I deeply regret this choice, yet I am unable to alter my feelings. I am devoted to my children, but I regret having them. I recognize that this may appear contradictory, but I believe I lack the maternal instincts necessary to care for them adequately. I had hoped that by finding a partner who could fulfill my aspirations, I would feel a sense of fulfillment. However, this has only led to a sense of discontent with my current circumstances. I apologize for misleading you. I recognize that I have been a poor mother to my children. However, I do not regret pursuing my dreams and seeking a better life. What about his wife? What about your husband? What about your children? What about your family? Her demeanor shifted abruptly. My inquiries seemed to trouble her, and she no longer appeared remorseful for her actions. I am no longer concerned with these details. It is now my turn to pursue the life I have always dreamed of. I desire a humble husband and 2 disrespectful children. The presence of children with unclean faces does not facilitate my objective of achieving a state of tranquility. I obtained the necessary documentation and now request that you depart, allowing me to resume my daily activities. This straightforward approach proved effective. I promptly departed the premises upon retrieving the boys. Carol suggested that I notify her if I required further assistance with telephone calls. I contacted the utility companies and instructed them to maintain the services until the end of the month. I must admit that I felt a certain degree of empathy for her. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. I did not receive any further communication from Janice. The lawyer informed me that everything proceeded as planned. My new position was satisfactory, but I missed the opportunity to purchase a business. Another individual acquired the business and a quarter of the adjacent land. My supervisor indicated that the business would be transformed into a horse breeding farm. My employment was secure, but my chance to become a homeowner was lost. 2 weeks later, construction commenced adjacent to the feed store. We attempted to discern the nature of the construction, and finally, one of the employees I inquired with the site engineer, who informed me that the structure was a veterinary clinic for large animals. I found this information intriguing but ultimately dismissed it as mere speculation. The entire building was erected in less than 60 days, with the new owner scheduled to arrive on Saturday. As I was passing by on my way to lunch with a colleague, I was suddenly struck by curiosity. To my surprise, both boys began shouting, "Cindy, Cindy, here she is, looking better than ever." Marge was with her, and Cindy had obtained her veterinary degree and was interested in breeding show horses. While managing a large veterinary clinic, Marge and I discussed the new building with Cindy. We all went out to lunch together, and Cindy informed us that she was also constructing a new house on the property to be closer to her work. The boys and I were visibly pleased on our way home that evening. 5 years later, Cindy was breeding horses of remarkable beauty. Her veterinary clinic was thriving, and I had just opened my 6th feed store. The boys had 2 younger sisters whom they adored. My mother-in-law Marge and Mr. Gilbert would visit every weekend. I never did ascertain his first name. Janice never did come to visit the boys. I am grateful for your attention and for reading this text to the end. Should you find this account interesting, I would be grateful if you would subscribe.